The following is an episode of the Father More podcast, and my guest on this episode is Nick Fowler. Nick Fowler is the head of strength and conditioning for Brute Strength, which does a lot of online strength and conditioning programming for athletes all over the world in many different sports. And Nick is a really interesting guy. I got a chance to know him a lot better during this interview. He has a lot of facets to his life that I didn't know about. And before we even decided to pursue having him as a guest on the podcast, I didn't even know he had kids. So it was really interesting to learn that there was a lot to his life that he doesn't particularly share very freely and isn't commonly known. And he had a very adventurous life. I mean, he was a professional climber, world records. He has a history as a firefighter, a wildlands firefighter on the repel team. So he just like is living this like very high adrenaline life. Very, very free is not quite the word, but it's more like a really, really extreme ownership of his team and his responsibilities and his life and his control, and then having to sort of adapt to letting go of a lot of that when he and his wife have their two daughters who are now entering that age, teen to preteen, where they don't really want to do a lot of things with him or share the same interests that he does. It was really interesting to get a chance to talk to him about, how seriously he takes this process of being a dad and what types of ups and downs there are throughout the years of being a dad, the things he remembers the most, the things he kind of maybe wishes he had done a little bit differently, and not so much about regret, but about this idea of there's lost opportunities that he could have just gotten a little bit more out of that would have improved the already happy life and relationship that he has to be even greater. And I really appreciated talking to him about that because it was interesting to hear him explain that it's not necessarily like there's a somber side, there's a serious side, there's a side of almost you have to mourn part of your existence being turned into and your energy being turned into what it's like being with, what it's like being a father and a husband in the situations that they find themselves in. I've really found that to be a fascinating conversation. I think you will as well. So enjoy and take care. So I guess, we had this conversation earlier this week where we kind of like primed a little bit of what we were going to be talking about. And one of the things that struck me was this sort of like, and you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but this sort of like push pull that you have and like the various aspects of your life. You have two daughters, teenage daughters, is that right? So I get that
One of
right?
them's a teenager. Thank
Okay.
God I only got one. So the other one's 10 years old. So the other one is
Oh,
catching up quick.
you have a teenager and a teenager. Yeah, that's
Yes. Yeah.
uh
Who thinks she's 16? So maybe it's all the same. I don't know.
um so you have this push pull going on with your various roles of like, you're a dad to two daughters, and yet you also have in like your life you've had this like really adventurous outside, like doing crazy, not crazy things, but like having kind of wild experiences. And you know in a way that's kind of like the thing that people see sometimes. They're like, I don't want to get tamed by like my family, like I think that's like a cliche. It's like a weird cliche, but like, like I don't want to get tamed by my family. And you're kind of living that fine line of trying to find where your like adventurous wildlife world, like wildland firefighter, like, on the front lines type like life exists, along with this like raising two daughters thing, which is, equally kind of adventurous, but very, very different type of adventure.
Yeah. Yeah. And it was interesting. So early on, like when Annie and I, so Annie's my wife, and, we found out, hey, we're going to have a kid, pregnant, super excited. Both of us had kind of been thinking about that for some time. And I remember, like the birth, right? It was the most amazing thing ever. And we can kind of maybe go however you want to set it up. But long story short, like I was really excited about being a father, having a family. Like family's always been a huge thing for me. And I never felt that kind of, oh, I didn't want to have kids because it was gonna, take my identity away, and that whole thing. Now, you fast forward 10, 12 years, and yeah, like I think I've, and a little bit of it is career, and just having just life in general kind of get out of balance, and giving myself, like emptying my cup for so many years, and not just with family, but with, career, and job, and everything else. To where, yeah, like that's probably a good, you know a good way to describe it. I've never heard it said that way, like, being tamed. And so there's like, yeah, that like inner me trying to, figure out what adventures, like, my identity as a man, as a father, right, as a, as a boss, as an employee, like, where do I fit in, and who am I? And looking back, like a lot of that was defined by the crazy things I was doing. So yeah.
I have I have this like weird thing where I'm not 100% sure. It's like there's no clarity to me how that sense of identity is best developed, right? Because you just listed off, I think, a very, very classic masculine man thing. It's what do you do, right? It's like the first thing you ask another guy that you meet. You're like, waiting in the line to go to the urinal at like a football game, and you're like, so what do you do, right? It's like you're basically trying to define this person, and we use that like mirror on ourselves as well. What do you do? Who
Yeah.
are you? Those are very similar questions. And the idea of looking for your identity and trying to find your sense of identity through your work, it feels like it's been culturally set into like who we are. You know what I mean? Like our parents were like that, our parents were like that, but I don't know if there was really any other options back then. And now that everything has kind of been exploded and like decoupled from one another, and everyone's kind of like floating in this world of like Instagram and TikTok and work, and not really sure what the next thing is going to be. I imagine it's really difficult to find or accept a sense of identity that doesn't necessarily couple you with like everything that comes along with that bucket of whatever it is that you would do otherwise.
Yeah. And I've always been like a super intense guy. So whatever I've done, you know, my sights have always been on excelling and becoming a master of it. And so I think inherently it kind of, I don't know, lent itself to being unbalanced, right? Like pouring myself into that. And then, every waking moment, spent, doing, pursuing whatever I was pursuing at the time. Yeah, it kind of took over an identity, And so, I like the way you kind of, you talk about it, because I definitely relate to like the identity. I don't want to call it a crisis, because it's not. It's far
That's like
from
too
it, right?
dramatic. That's like too dramatic of a word for it.
Yeah, but there's this like angst, uh in terms of like, oh, who am I? And like I meet people who don't know me, or know me in my current context, right? And they don't know about the past 30 years, and then like I have friends from like in my 20s that really don't understand what I'm doing now. And so it's been an interesting process in terms of like establishing relationships with others. And I think a lot of times, like, we define who we are, we find out who we are through the relationships we have. And so yeah, it's interesting, it's meeting new people. It's like, hey, what do you do? And it's like, oh, like I hate that question.
Yeah.
Because one, it's just hard for me to define, and I always feel like I'm giving an elevator pitch,
Yeah.
which is just feels, disingenuous. or incomplete. Maybe that's a better way, right?
Yeah, it also doesn't a lot of what um a lot of what work and career has become in the past 5 years or 10 years doesn't really fit into an easy description. You can't say I'm an accountant, I'm a
Right.
lawyer, I'm a doctor, I'm a garbage man, I'm a gardener, whatever, right? Like you can't really use those because that doesn't fit. What I even like my own family, like my dad, we had dinner with like my entire family. I have two older brothers, they have kids, um, and my eldest nephew, he's 10. That's why I know about teenagers. He wants to
Yeah.
be a YouTuber. He wants to have a YouTube channel. And he loves that I have a YouTube channel. Huge fan, does not care that it has nothing to do with any of his interests. As far as he's concerned, I have a YouTube channel and that's really cool. And I should be playing Minecraft or Roblox or whatever the name of the game is. And
Yeah.
he goes, at the dinner table, he says this. He says, I want to be a YouTuber when I grow up. And my dad, who knows what I do, is like, what's a YouTuber? So there's no like there's no real sense of like you can't communicate what it is that we do on a regular basis as our jobs as an identifier anymore because of how broad those terms have become. And maybe you lose something in that because there's no communication there, or maybe you gain something because then it forces you to think of things differently.
Yeah, there's a bunch of like preconceived ideas, right? I mean, I was a professional climber for a long time, and so it's like, oh, what do you do? I climb, and like, there's that like, well, what do you mean you climb? Like, and so like having to go into like what that means, right? Or hey, like I'm a firefighter, right? And so how, like, I think a lot of the way I define myself is on things I've done. Um, and I think the more things that I do, the harder it is to define myself to other people. And so honestly, I just don't even try. Like, um, and I don't, a lot of people don't know, that like I traveled the world climbing and I have like world speed records and like all this stuff, right? Because I don't talk about it because it's not, that's what I did. And it's not like I'm trying to hold on to that to define me, even though it has molded me into the person I am. And honestly, that's how I kind of feel with kids, it's like 13 years of being a father and trying to figure it out because it's like I haven't figured it out yet. And yeah, so it's I don't know, it's tough. I don't have an answer. I just know that like my efforts in trying to meet people is try to, what's important is what I do today, because what I did yesterday doesn't hold much water, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
um Even though it's made me who I am and helped me kind of cultivate the life I have. I mean, it's awesome. But especially with it, like my daughters, right? Like they've they know all these like phases in my life, and it doesn't, at the end of the day, it's like I'm still dad, right? And it's like if I'm impatient one day, or if we're having special, like it's all defined in the moment, which has made me really appreciate that, right? So it's like if I'm impatient and frustrated, like that's who I am, right? And if I'm
Mhm.
like loving and just joyful and really in the moment, well, that's who I am at that moment. And it also makes it's like almost making it that much more difficult because it's like, well, then am I like schizophrenic because it's like I'm changing every day, every week? um and I think that's probably the biggest thing that like fatherhood, like being a parent, has brought out in me, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah. I think there's so I take notes while we have these conversations. I also have some notes from the call that we had earlier this week, just kind of catch up and stuff. But there's a lot that you've said here that is really interesting to me. And one of the things that you just said is like, there's like almost like an intensity and a sense of being present that you like feel things I mean, I've been a dad for 2.5 months. So I think I've got a long journey ahead of me, and I know absolutely nothing about it at this point. Um, but there's this sense that I have of this like just intensity of like a burning sun of like every moment. Like sometimes if I'm frustrated, it's like 1,000 times more frustrating than it has been. And if I'm like happy, it's 1,000 times happier than I've been. And if I'm like calm and serene, I feel like a Zen master. Like there's this really interesting, and I don't know if I would say that for me in those moments that feels like it's a whole definition of who I am at that time, and it just feels really complete, as much as I would say that it just feels like those peaks and valleys have gotten taller and deeper just in the past 2.5 months.
Yeah. Well, I think they mean more. This is my experience, right? Like if I wasn't present, or frustrated, or I fell short on something, like what did it really impact? Now I see my daughters, and like I see their emotional response. Like I see, over the years, like creating this relationship, and for me, um, the impact is real, right? And so it's almost like I can't. I mean, I could ignore it, but I see it, right? And they don't care what I've done yesterday. They care about, what are we doing together, or what's happening today. Um, and just being a kid myself, and I think everyone can relate. Like when I was young, like I had no like sense of time, and future and past was like, all I really experienced was like this day-to-day presence, and obviously as we get older, that kind of extends in both directions.
Yeah. Yeah, it does. My mom came over last night. I just moved to LA. We just moved to LA, my wife and I, before we had the baby, to be closer to my family. My family's all out here. My mom came over yesterday and she was like, "So are you guys come over on Sunday? Remember I texted you 2 weeks ago about that thing in the afternoon." I was like, I don't even know what day of the week it is. Like you're asking me the wrong question. Like I can't tell you. I literally could not tell you what you texted me an hour ago, much less what we planned on 2 weeks ago. So yeah, it does extend in each direction. There's a couple things that you mentioned earlier that I really want to touch on because uh I'm figuring this thing out, and not just the whole being a dad thing, but I'm also figuring out like being a man, being a husband, and being kind of creating this podcast, and the conversations that I've had helps shape what it ends up being. And one of the things that has come up a lot over the past handful of conversations and interviews that I've done is this idea of trying to figure out like how you fit into all the various roles that you have collected over the years. First
Mhm.
you were just yourself, right? And then you become part of a relationship. So then you have a partner. Then that's also your husband, and then you're a dad, and then that's all on top of what your work is and all the various things that come along with that, and finding your presence in all those different things and finding yourself in all those different things without necessarily losing who you are to any single one of them or any group of them. And you had mentioned, earlier this week, you had mentioned in this call, you said something along the lines of, growing up and being an adult is a real challenge that nobody talks about because you're essentially being defined by like your marriage, your career, or whatever, something that happens to you, whether it's like something really positive or something really negative. And then earlier, just maybe 5 minutes ago, you were saying that it's not exactly like a crisis of trying to figure this out. It's more of like this angst, these like rough edges. And the question that I have here is, do you think that that's just an eternal part of the process, that you just are constantly being ground across all these different rough edges for all these different roles and stuff, and you just kind of have to find your way to like fluidly slip between each one of them? Or is there actually a way of, you know trying to say this is this, and this is how they interact, and that's it, and like, here's how I fit into this equation.
Yeah, I wish it was like that, or at least I don't think so. I think it's messy. I think life is messy. Um, Chances are, and maybe I'm completely wrong, but chances are, if it is that simple, like, you know, challenges, growth isn't like growth is painful. Good, bad, and different. Like it's uncomfortable. So yeah, I think that, man, that's like the $1 million question.
Let's answer it. We'll split the profits.
Yeah, right. Um, yeah, it's even hard to like pin down, like, okay, well, what is the actual question in there, right?
Yeah.
So I know, like, for me, identity. So what comes to mind is like the classic like midlife crisis. Um, and I think that like that maybe fits, and I've thought about that a lot in like the last, I don't know, 5-7 years, and it and and I'm no expert on like any of this, right? But I think at some point you have accumulated more, like, enough past memories, relationships, accomplishments, failures, all of this, right? And then there comes a time, and I think kids accelerate this. That's kind of my thought. And there comes a time when the future um, becomes a little bit more precious. And I think for me it's accelerated because I'm not as fit as I was, right? And so like I still have the same aspirations and the same things I want to do, but I'm physically incapable of doing. And so like that is a harsh reality. And it's just one example. It could be, in business, it could be in relationships, it could be whatever, right? I mean, obviously experiencing some, tragic sickness, right? Health, I think, is a big catalyst to that. So, I think something happens to where you realize um, the past has not, I don't want to say been wasted, but it's like, youth is wasted on the young, that whole saying. Um,
Yeah.
which is how I feel, right? I'm like, man, like I wish I would have like slowed down, smelled the flowers more. I wish I would have done this. I wish I would have done this. And like, and not, it's not in regret. It's just looking at my current life, and it's like it's speeding by, right? And I haven't, I really want to like slow down and like enjoy it, and make the most of it. And I think kids accelerate that. At least for me it has, because, man, I can't believe I have a 13-10 year old, and then I have my brother-in-law was says and phrases his time in terms of summers left with his daughters. And I'm like, man, I have like 4 summers left with my daughter, right? And so like that, and it's something that when I was a new parent, I'm sure you've heard it a million times. Oh, make sure you enjoy your kids, like make sure you take time, and all of this stuff. And and like, you know, intellectually I know that. I'm like, yeah, I know it. But all this time's gone by, and it's like, wow, like it's irreplaceable. Like when my kids were like 4 years old, it was like amazing. I mean, it's amazing now, but that time to me was so special. And I think there's this like this genuine innocence, and watching a person develop into their own, and there's a personality, and they can start choosing their own, making their own decisions. Um and now it's like my 13-year-old half the time doesn't want anything to do with me. If I can get a conversation out of her, it's like success, other than like the 1 or 2 word kind of disgruntled answers. And so yeah, so I think, like, the midlife crisis of the realization um that all this time has gone by, and now all of a sudden it's like, wow, my time is limited. And then that becomes that much more precious, that much more important. And then I don't know, it's almost like scrambling to embrace it, like that's kind of how I feel. And again, none of it's bad. Like, I've incredible life, like wouldn't trade anything, but there's this like sense of like wanting to make the most out of it. And a lot of that is only realized in the rear view mirror, unfortunately.
How can that get turned around? Have you found any ways of like embracing those fleeting moments more, aggressively or more readily or more in a more like solid and permanent way so that you can, maybe look back on even just a time or an experience and think, you know what, I nailed that one, or I got that one right, or like there was no wasted opportunity there?
Yeah, I think, um, man, honestly, I think photographs and video is a big part of it. Um, Especially now, like, I look at a photo when my kid was young, and I almost like relive a moment, right? With any photograph. And there's probably some nostalgia that's kind of like built in there, but I think that's the first thing that comes to mind is like, take pictures, take videos, and then, you know, looking at last year's pictures, like, makes me, it's a good reminder of saying, wow, like that came and went. And then it's like today. So I think for me, that's probably something that's very simple that, again, I wish I'd taken more photographs, more video, like all that stuff. Um and then I think sharing in the experience, um of fatherhood, of kids, um and hearing other people's stories and sharing your own stories, and kind of like, going through it with other people, other friends. My wife, we do that a little bit. um yeah, so I think those two, like, that's what I try to do. And then now, like, the way I try to take all that, and it's like, okay, well,
There
what
you
do
go.
I do with it? And it's like, now I'm just trying to take 5 minutes and just like be present, and you know I'm in the midst of driving around. Same with my wife, we're like driving everywhere for activities and sports and friends and like all this stuff, and I can't stand it. And I just try to remind myself, like, it's a good thing, like, just like those sleepless nights when you're going through it right now, like, those are amazing, even though, like, when you're running on 2 hours of sleep, it doesn't feel like it. um yeah, just, making an effort. Yeah.
did did you have a peer group of, other dads and other parents that you were able to like compare notes to, or is this kind of something that has happened? Because obviously, I think it's very rare that somebody has a peer group that sticks with them for their entire lives, but you're talking about over the past 10, 13 years. Have you had a peer group of like other parents and other dads that you kind of like compare notes with?
um so all, like, peer group is either their kids are way older or way younger. And
Mhm.
so I'm in this, with all my friends, I'm kind of in this weird spot where there's not a lot of, yeah, my peer group doesn't consist of, you know 10, 12 year olds. It's like I have a bunch of friends who have, 2, 4, 6 year olds, and then we have a ton of friends who, um yeah, getting ready to graduate high school or already in college. And so it's kind of been a little bit of a lonely experience in that regard, which I think has been tough. Um, and then, it's like, okay, well, kids are in school, and it's like, okay, well, let's have a new peer group. And I don't know, it's like you get older, it's harder to make friends,
So much harder. It's so much
Yeah,
harder. It's like, I don't know if I want to hang out with you. You don't seem like you're my type of people. This isn't it. Like,
right.
fate brought us together because our kids are in the same class, but we do not need to be friends. And that is not
Yeah,
going to, yeah. No,
yeah.
that makes sense. I, yeah, I don't know. Like, I don't know. The youth is wasted on the young thing. Uh,
Oh, it's so
I,
accurate.
I was just talking about this with, I want to say I was talking about it with John Woolley.
Mm,
Uh, it's like my older brother, he's only 6 years older than me. And he's been saying that exact phrase to me. So I'm 32
mm-hmm.
and so he's 38. Uh, he's been saying that phrase to me for 10 years. And I'm like, you're not even 30. I remember the first time he said it to me, I'm like, this is bullshit. Like, you can't say that because you're not in anywhere close to not being youth. Like, you yourself are currently youth. Like, this does not work. And now that I look back at it, it kind of feels like either he was trying to remind himself, because
Mm.
I'm now around the same age that he was when he first started saying that. He is trying to remind himself of what that means, or he was just really trying so hard to get me to believe it, which I did not understand it at all. um
When
and,
did that click for you? Like, when did that
um
phrase start to, take form for you?
I think it I don't know if I've yet crystallized it to, like, really affect the way that I behave. And that's part of the reason why I like having these conversations, is because it shows me that it's possible, it's important, it's necessary. Like, I can actually sort of be more present. That's something that I have struggled with a lot. But it really kind of clicked, honestly, when I had my kid. Like, when my son was born and I was
Mm,
holding him and I was thinking about my dad at
mm,
like my age having a son, having his third son, and thinking about what my relationship is like with my parents, and what my friends' relationships are like with their parents. And like, I have a couple of friends who all had we all had the kids within a few months of each other. So, it's just the perspective that came along with, here's a new human being that my wife and I created. My wife did most of the work. And we're responsible for him. We have like a vision that of the type of person we want him to be. We have an idea of the type of family life that we want to lead. And it's like, it comes into very stark contrast immediately how quickly he changes. It's like week to week. Like, this morning he woke up and I was like, you're different than you were last night. Like, you've like, something has happened overnight. Like, you went to sleep and a few hours later you woke up and you had a couple more creases and you're like smiling a little bit more and you're cooing a little bit differently. Something's changed in just this past few hours. And that acceleration of like my life experience by watching my son has kind of made me feel like, okay, if I can really hold on to this idea of like youth is wasted on the young, what would it have been like 10 years ago if I had believed that? Well, I should start doing that now, so that 10 years from now I can look back and say, all right, I kind of got that right. I kind of did at least this one thing
yeah.
in the right direction.
No, that makes sense. I relate to that for sure. And then I think about, like, well, what beliefs or what realizations I'm going to have 10 years from now, and I really try to dig in and be like, how, and it's like predicting the future. You just can't do it.
No, it's almost impossible.
Yeah,
I mean, you can come up with the things that are very convincing, and you'll never
yeah,
know if you're
convince me.
accurate or not. You'll never know if you're right, but you can certainly convince yourself of a whole lot of things. Um, you had mentioned earlier that you spent your entire life, with excellence and mastery as sort of like your endeavor. Like you were just looking for mastery and excellence in all the things that you're going for. And I'm curious, did you find a way of applying that drive to parenthood? Like, I haven't talked to a single dad who's been like, I nailed it, and thumbs up 100%. It's been so super cool. I didn't do anything wrong. And if someone did say that to me, I wouldn't believe them. But I wonder with like, someone who obviously has been successful being process oriented in the past. So I mean, how do you apply that to something as dynamic as a child?
I've never felt like such a failure as being a parent. And not that I've like, I don't think that I failed, but you can't define it. Like defining success isn't, yeah, it just doesn't, I don't think you can, or at least I haven't been able to, yeah, like everything else, like super proud of, accomplished amazing things, like set out, accomplished what I set out to do. And being a parent is just such a different experience for me. Like being a father and just, constantly thinking back, oh, like, you know, I should have done this, or I wish I'd done this, or more of this, or less of that, is constantly there. And I would argue that that's probably for most people. Maybe not all the time, right? Ebbs and flows, but yeah, I mean, and I think that's been a really hard thing to digest, right? Because it's like a lot of my like self-worth has been on my accomplishments, right? Like, I'm proud of what I've done, or the hard work I put into it. And then with being a father, I that is not what I feel, um I feel a lot of pride when, you know my daughter accomplishes something that she's been really working hard for, but I don't feel like, oh, it's because of me, I did that. Like it's so far from the truth.
Yeah.
It's like, no, 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 like she did that in spite of me. um and it's like, yeah, I don't know, I don't, um yeah, and I think that's been the hardest thing. So if for me, like um like I operated on like, okay, like we go back to the beginning of our conversation about defining who I am, right? Like who am I? And my how I define myself was through accomplishments, right? And this sense of success and, um yeah, and then all of a sudden thrust into parenthood, where that is so like far removed from my reality. um and it's and I think it deepens that question of like, well, who am I? Like if I'm not accomplishing, like I don't think I can accomplish being a father. Like you're just being a father, right? And yeah, so I think that that's been a big part of the like angst, if that makes sense. And everyone that I know, it's like everyone's in the same boat. There's no manual. There's no like instruction manual. I've been trying to read books and stuff, but
I
and a lot of it's good, like, implementing, you know, yeah, just
I
trying to implement.
sorry to interrupt you there.
No, you're good.
Go
Go.
ahead, finish that thought. Finish that thought. 'Cause I'm just taking notes because I really like what you said, that you don't think you accomplish fatherhood is just being a father. I love that quote.
Yeah.
That's beautiful.
And yeah, and I think being anything is messy because it's a process. It's like there is no, first, second, third step. Okay, great. Like now I'm done. Um, and it's ever evolving. So by the time you figure it out, it's all changed.
Yeah, that's something I even in the past few weeks I've picked up. I feel like we'll have like 2 or 3 days where I'm like, I've got this. This
Yeah.
kid's I've 100% got his schedule down. I've got my wife's schedule down. I've got his sleep thing down. The dogs are good. We're in balance. And then
Yeah.
like, as humans do, he grows, he adapts, he evolves, he changes, he becomes more of a baby, and suddenly all of that like perfect balance that I had created is just turns out to be a house of cards and just is totally gone.
Yeah.
And I think the idea of being driven by accomplishments or being defined by accomplishments, a necessary portion of that means that there's a finish line. There's a thing that you have done.
Yes.
Past tense, you did the thing. And fatherhood doesn't feel like that to me. And it sounds like what you're saying is it's not like that at all. There is no, you can set, I guess, micro goals. We made it to the end of the day, or we made it to the end of the school year, or you graduated high school, or whatever types of goals you can set. But even after a certain point, your child's agency and autonomy is what got them across that finish line. So you can't really even take credit for like accomplishing that. You can't like check that box for yourself. You're not the one graduating high school. They're the one graduating high school. And I think there's like there's an inherent issue that has to arise there, right? Of like, if you're defining yourself by accomplishment and there's nothing to accomplish here, there's just thing to do. You just do the thing. You wake up, you do the thing, you go to bed, you do it again tomorrow.
Yeah.
uh it has to have like a rough edge. It has to rub constantly in some way, maybe not like negative all the time. Obviously, if that's the case, there's something else going on, but like there has to be some sort of rub with just this idea of trying to like fit that hat on your head and trying to find out when you look in the mirror, you're like, who am I? Am I doing this right? What does all this, like, where does all this go? Is this the way it should be?
Yeah. When you, what comes to mind is being a business owner. I owned a gym for 10 years, right? And in the beginning of my experience with my business is like I'd always try to like, you know, clear my list of things to do. Like, oh, this is what I need to do, and like I got to get it all done. And for anybody who is, entrepreneur, small business owner, whatever, like that is so far from reality because that list, you never get it done. And it's really easy to kind of burn out in that same, that's, yeah, really easy to burn out because you're just never done. And that's a lot of like what my experience with fatherhood is, a lot better than owning a small business for sure. um, but and I think having a small business like helped me understand that too. It's like it's okay not to get everything done. Like, this is what I can do. I've done good. This is my day. Tomorrow's another day. And really kind of embracing a process versus a project. And I think that fatherhood is just that, right? Like, I can't go into it as a project. I have to go into it as a process, which means that, I mean, my daughters aren't perfect. I'm not perfect. My wife's not perfect. Situations aren't perfect. All that being said, like, I wouldn't change anything over the last 13 years. Like, there isn't any moments that I'm like, oh, like, why did I do that? Or, it's more along the lines of like, I wish I'd done more of that.
Interesting. So it's not necessarily a regret is like a really painful emotion to deal with. um I think there's a lot of people who go through really tragic circumstances that have like crippling regret, and getting through that is probably one of the hardest things that anyone could do. I think there's a lot of people that go through that sort of thing. um so I'm not sure, if regret is the thing, right? There has to be a word, and I don't know what it is, of you know, you didn't get as much juice out of that squeeze as you could have, and looking back at it as you should have or would have if you were to do it again, right? It's not exactly like a regret of something that happened as much as it's like, I just could have done this a little bit more or a little bit better or had a little bit more of this experience.
Yeah, I think that's pretty accurate. Like regret, I think about like, oh, I want to go back and I want to change something because
Yeah.
it didn't work. With being a father, it's like I want to go back to um apply what I know now to make things even better, right? Or to appreciate those moments that I think about often. Um yeah. And so it's not, yeah, it's not regret because it's like there's nothing really like bad happened. It's just like, yeah, I don't know. I don't know what it's
What
called.
what are those moments that you think about?
Oh man. Um there's like there's not even like yeah, I don't, so there's a whole bunch of moments. But like I think about like, you know, where we used to live like was little like kindergarten daycare, right? And used to walk my daughter there. And like that, those, you know, the just the little hand and the excitement and like that, that's one that stands out. Like just taking time like in my gym when no one was there, like playing Legos on the floor, like with my daughter. Even like going back to like when my old, the most amazing moment of my life, and it was like the first true, like first time that I truly experienced a love that I just didn't know existed.
When your eldest was born, is that what we said?
Yeah, yeah. And we didn't know if it was a boy or a girl. We didn't we just, you know, we had two names, we're like whatever, and it happened, and it was like it was truly like awe inspiring. Like I couldn't even describe the emotions and everything. But obviously that, because it's such a powerful experience, you know, and everything like fear, like oh my god, like you're gonna let me this you're gonna let me take this thing home now. Like what, like, and then I remember being in the parking lot trying to put the put the car seat together, and the nurse having to come out and be like, let me help you. I'm like, thank god, like, you know. Like um yeah, it's just like little things like that. And then just even when they're older, you know, like a lot of, you know, we took a lot of time and did a lot of like adventures and road trips, and I wish that um yeah, just I think that I want to hold on to those experiences. And as we get older, right? So we get older and the memories fade. And that's what like it kind of breaks my heart, you know. I'm like, oh man, like that, you know. And there's no way to like, okay, something's happening now, like, oh, I'm going to enjoy it more, be more present now so it's longer lasting later. Like it doesn't, I don't think it works that way. Like it's just part of life, and that's part of that rough edge, right? Like that angst, that like that's how it is. And there is a sense of mourning, I think, being a father and watching your kids grow up, you know. um yeah.
Do you talk to your wife or your friends about this experience? Like, do you talk to them about this feeling do you have, or did I just like get you at like a moment and
Yeah,
now we're having this conversation?
yeah, you probably that. Yeah, I don't, I mean, I maybe have mentioned it in passing, but it's an analytical conversation, right?
Yeah.
I got a couple friends that we talk, but like they don't have kids, and so, you know, it's tough, or their kids are a lot younger, or yeah, I don't know. It's not like I'm having these conversations every day.
So, uh, how how do you balance out all of this with the idea that like you still have a wife that you love and a relationship that you also have to like foster, like you have to actively be a loving husband. Do you know what I mean? Like that, the
Yeah,
idea of like being able to do all these things, I don't know, I still am trying to figure out how anybody is able to like have a business, be a husband, be a dad, be a partner, be friends, be a son, be a brother, like, you know, I don't understand how all those things fit together because, you know, I maybe I haven't studied it enough, or I haven't seen it happen, or I haven't practiced it. So like how are you balancing out all those things?
I don't know. I mean, that's like the true answer is like I don't know. I mean, a lot of it is my wife. My wife's like rock star, and like if I had to do this alone, I would be like my kids would be a mess. I'd be a mess. Like the house would be a mess. Like I don't even know. Like so, I don't know. I mean, it's almost like I'm like just feel lucky, you know, and I know that like you know you have kids and you know marriage is tough in its own, but when you start getting pulled in different directions and like my wife and I were like, yeah, we should have like date night once a week, you know, and like we've said that for years and we kind of still don't. And we like still want to like you know make time for just her and I and to go do things, but it's hard, you know. um I think the business was, I don't want to say regret because I hate that word, but the impact of trying to run a business and kids was probably the biggest impact. And obviously you need a job. Like if you don't have a job, you can stay home with your kids all day, great, but you got a job, so like you know it's like 9 hours, 10 hours, 8 hours of the day that you're away from your kids and things like that, and that's hard. But that's you know that's one reason why I got out of um, fire. Right, like I was a firefighter for many years. In a way, like kind of you know took early retirement. Um, and we're I'll tell you the story. So we rented an RV, and I'll probably get the ages a little off, but my oldest, she was like 6, and my youngest was like less than a year, like a year old. And we rented an RV, and we're gonna go to Disneyland. So we drove to Disneyland, and we took a two week trip, right? And this was in oh oh nine oh like yeah oh nine maybe 2010 or something. Um, and you know, so I had these years of like being a wildland firefighter, and you know, I exclusively worked on a helicopter crew. So a lot of it would be like, hey, okay, I'm off to work. Like I'll see you later, and I could not come home for dinner. I could be gone for 3 weeks. I could be home for dinner. I could get a call in the middle of the night and be like, okay, I'm driving to the base. Like I'm out. And so there was this big like I wanted to be part of my daughter's life, and like being kind of pulled away from it was tough. I love my job, like, and I miss it in a lot of aspects for sure. But anyways, you fast forward to this road trip, and there was something on this trip that I was just like, I'm not going back. Like, and there was like this instant decision. There was this clarity, and there was a conversation with my wife saying, how can we make this happen? I'd been like coaching CrossFit and in the CrossFit for some years. And so I was like, oh, well, and then I knew enough people, enough about it. I was like, okay, well, you know, I'll start a gym, and I'll make, you know, hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. I'll be like, you know, mobility all day, hang out with my family all day. Like, first of all, that's not how it works. So anybody who's thinking about a gym, far from
That's
the
not it.
reality.
Yeah, that is
No.
absolutely not it. Yeah, the only
No.
mobility work you're getting is when you're bending over to clean the toilets. That's it. That's
Yeah, yeah. Oh, completely. But that was it. So there was this like there was this active decision saying, you know what, like I don't want to be gone. I want to be part of my kids' lives more, and this is the way to do it. And needless did I know, having a small business was actually mm, it it was just as, or if not more disruptive than me being in fire. Um, and obviously, like it was new, like, you know, looking back, like, I didn't have any like real business experience, and I thought my leadership experience would translate. And I realized really early on that management is very different than leadership. And then going through like the whole like growing pains of that, like wanting to get everything done, working way too much, like life is out of balance. And I closed my gym a year ago, almost. And so it was the best thing I ever did. And now I'm able to like, you know, and even in the years leading up, like there was this conscious decision to, you know what, like, no, like I kind of learned to start to say no. And my family, like I was always thinking like, I'm going to build this thing so then I can have time for my family. And that's actually a lot of, I hear a lot of people saying that, like, oh, I want to do this, so then this. And I think when it comes to, you know, being a father, which is a full-time job in itself, like learning how to do that, and um and with family and with kids, like there is no, if this then that. It's just, it's happening, right?
yeah, that's
And again, these are my experiences. Like I'm sure people are having all sorts of different experiences, but yeah, this is kind of yeah, it's tough.
what I'm thinking here is, when people talk about like this XYZ, whatever, has been a massive problem in my life, or has been an issue, or has caused issues, or the ripple effects, secondary network effects, or second order effects, whatever, have been problems, right? Generally, they're talking about something that has like a really significant impact, 15, 20, 25% negative impact across the board. I'm making numbers up here, but you understand what I'm saying here.
Yeah.
um that's the type of like really bad, like meteor crash into your life type decision that ends up ripple down the line that you regret and want to change. And what it sounds like, especially what you said at the end there, which was like, it's not build this in order to that, because you're going to miss that while you're building this.
Yeah.
It sounds like the like difference here, like the knobs could turn one dial, like 1% or like
Hmm.
2% in one direction versus another, and it would be an almost not like a night and day difference, but it would be a feeling of having been more, present, experienced more stuff, or turned something into something, those adventures that you talked about, like having more of those. That's a couple turns on the dial here and there. That's not even necessarily a huge thing. And my brother and I owned a gym for 5 years, and I know how, it's like paying my coaches instead of paying myself, and working, coaching 22 classes a week, as well as running managing the part-time team, and like the crew, and programming, and this and that. And it's like, it's an impossible task to have. And my brother had a kid like within 3 months of us opening our doors. So he had his son, who's now the 10-year-old that wants to be a YouTuber like me, because apparently that's what I do. He had his son in July, and we had opened our doors in March. And so it's like, I don't know how he was even able to be there on a regular basis and like get that work done with like the way that, it sort of like drains all of your energy. And I think that's something
Hmm.
that any small business owner is going to feel, any entrepreneur who's like working on those things is going to feel, because it just takes so much of your energy. And I wonder if it really just does come down to, maybe a couple of percentage points change in one direction or another is going to make a really big swing over time of what your, memory is of that period of your life.
I would agree, and that's definitely a good way to kind of phrase it, because it's not like, you know the creation of my gym destroyed my kid's life. It was far from it.
No,
But I think it goes back to like this desire, and again, not regret, but this desire to be able to go back and improve upon what was done. um and I think with kids it's magnified. As a father, like, those things are magnified because they are much more impactful, right? Like, if I don't have kids and I don't have anybody else in my life, like, the stuff I do really only impacts myself. And and I can put up with a lot of stuff, right? But to see that impact others, both good and bad, right? Like, you see the impact in like a positive way, and it's like, oh, like, yeah, it's just as powerful as like, oh man, like, you know, yeah.
From a selfish perspective, I'm curious. You mentioned that you went on a lot of adventures with your daughters when they were younger and growing up, and that's one of the things that you cherish. You cherish those memories. You mentioned that RV trip to go to Disneyland. What other things did you guys do? Because my wife also has a really like strong sense of adventure. We want to be able to spend time with our son. We want to, hopefully, knock on wood, have more than one child, and
Yeah.
having those types of experiences would be, really, really meaningful, I think, for our lives. So I'm curious what else you guys did.
Well, early on, like, my wife and I, like Annie and I, we specifically talked about how we wanted to continue our lives and include, our daughters into what we do, and not change our life to fit our daughter's life. And so that was like a very intentional thing, right? And so, like, my wife's a badass kayaker. I like to climb. We like to go on road trips. Like, we have a lot of adventures. And so, you know, um, like, I mean, good example is, not really for me, but this is probably like one of the best examples is my wife, she went to go climb Mount Whitney, right? And so she took, Tessa, who was super young, and like on this road trip, and you know, had some friends, and Tessa hung out and went and did this, and then came back. And like, for instance, we went to Yosemite. I spent a lot of time in Yosemite, so we've been there a couple times and taken my daughters climbing, and just kind of trying to include them into our life. I have kind of family scattered all around the world. Um, Family in Argentina and Spain and Europe and whatever. And so we've been to Spain a couple times, meeting cousins and things like that. Yeah. So I think that was, those were pretty amazing. Like, this past summer, my daughters like went on a week long river trip, kayak rafting, and they experienced that. Um, it's a little bit harder now. Like, they're older, they have facets of their own life and responsibilities that they're accumulating. Whether it's school or activities or sports. And so it's, I think in the last year there's a big shift, like a noticeable shift in like parent responsibility, parent uh energy, time. Like there's a shift. um but yeah, like we did so many different things. I built out a Sprinter van, and that was a big, like 5 years ago, like bought this tin can and like kind of built most of it myself. And we probably put, I don't know, 45, 50 days a year in that thing, going places, whether it's like overnight camping or like take 4 days to go here or whatever, maybe more, maybe like good solid 60, if not more. But
I am all ears for how you pulled that off, because that's not, to be fair, that's not the guy I am, right? I am
yeah.
not that guy right now, but I would love to have that as like part of my repertoire. Like, yeah, we got the Sprinter van. You want to go for a 2-week road trip? Let's do it.
So I mean, so Andy and I, we've always been like adventure, going places, and we're like, okay, we got a family. It's that much harder to do it in a car. And then getting everything together and packing, like even for a weekend, was like this big ordeal. So we're like, we fantasized, and we had friends with like Sprinter vans or whatever, and it's like everything's already in there. You just bring a bag of clothes and you go. Maybe stop off on the store on the way. And like for us, we're like, okay, that's how we continue to do and kind of live this life. And so yeah, 5, 6 years ago, we looked into Sprinter van. We put a deposit down, all this stuff, got cold feet, and we're like, oh, deposit's back. And then I spent the next year like fantasizing YouTube videos on like how to build things out. And I'm like, you know what? Like, I think I can do 90% of it. And so then, a year later, we're like, okay, we're going to buy it. And yeah, literally like YouTube video, how-to videos, like step by step. And I am not that guy either in terms of like being able to like build out a van. And there's some things like the cabinets and things like that we had kind of outsourced, but yeah, it was the best thing ever. It was actually the next so we had that RV trip, and then it was like, I don't know, 9 years, no, not even, like 7 years later, we had the Sprinter van. And I had a buddy who was like, I was putting like cedar shake slats on the roof to make it all look good. And I talked to a buddy. He's like, "Oh yeah, I did it in like 3 hours. It's super easy." Well,
Oh no.
meanwhile, it's like 3 days later, I'm still out there like, "Oh my god, like I hate you. Why'd you tell me 4 hours?" And it's like in the middle of it, so I can't stop. And we're supposed to leave for Disneyland like on a Thursday, and here it is like Sunday night, and I'm just like, "Oh my god, like please get this done." So long story short, like 6 p.m., I'm finally like, it's at a stopping point. Like, just the roof is up, like lights kind of work. I built like a little bed out of 2x4s in the back, and it was like still kind of a tin can. And 6 o'clock, like we all pile in, we're going. So we drove all night, right? And we got to LA in like LA traffic, and it was just this desperate, like, oh my God, we just want to get there. And yeah, so we roll up Disneyland, everything, and we spend the day like not having slept for 24 hours, like amazing experience. I think I fell asleep in like the Small World ride or something, snoring like next to my daughter. It was pretty funny. Um, but yeah, like you could do it.
I love it, dude. That's
Yeah.
awesome. I
Yeah.
I appreciate you sort of like sharing all these thoughts and experiences. I think one of the things that one of the pieces of feedback that I've gotten just over the past couple of episodes that people have listened to at this point, is that it's cool to hear uh conversations and analysis of this thing that we as like a species have been doing for millions of years, like hundreds of thousands of years, like thousands and thousands of generations. And yet we're in a situation right now where it's like uniquely our experience of how to be dads. There isn't any other generation that could speak to us. Like, we can't ask our parents or our grandparents how to deal with screen time for our kids, because that never was a
Yeah.
thing that they had to answer. And so the world that we're growing up in and the world that our kids are growing up in is so unique that it's refreshing, and it's really good for me because I'm a big like learn while doing guy, but I'm also a big learn by seeing other people do it or listening to other people who have done it. um and it's like it's just really nice to hear the sort of analysis and thoughts and like, what works and what doesn't, and how does it feel to have gotten to this point, and looking back at the things you may or may not have done. And I really just appreciate the honesty, and I appreciate the conversation, Nick.
Yeah, I've really enjoyed it for sure. And yeah, excited about what you're doing. I'll be listening to every episode, trying to get any little nuggets myself. So